give a warm welcome to the hosts of the Bride of Alternate Ending.
Hello, ghouls and goblins, and welcome back to Bride of Alternate Ending. I am your host with the ghost, Brennan Klein, and with me, as always, is your host without a ghost, unless it's right behind him, Tim Brayton.
I like that. How long have you been workshopping that one?
About 1 nanosecond before it came out of my mouth.
Well, I liked it. I think it landed. I think it played.
Okay, so this is a first for me.
Is it?
I feel like I don't open the show well. It's not my strength, I would argue.
It is. The show middles better than it begins. I think that is probably true.
Yeah, but we're still in the beginning, so let's try to keep this hot streak going. Thank you for joining me, Tim, as always.
Thank you for joining me, Brennan.
You're so welcome. We join each other, and we talk about movies that are of the horror family. Anyway.
So much for the hot streak.
So we are in a new year and a new month. It's January 2023. So what we're doing for the second year in a row is we're going to be looking back on the films that we've covered in the past and do films that are either sequels or remakes or follow-ups or whatever. So earlier this year, during Remake Month, we watched 1990's Night of the Living Dead. So we decided to kind of continue that by watching the remake of that film's sequel, the 2004 film Dawn of the Dead, directed by Zack Snyder and written by James Gunn.
I don't like what you just did, but I like that you felt brave enough and comfortable enough to do it.
Yeah, I think we've really created a safe space here for me to fail and you to mock me viciously.
This is, to be fair, almost every space I'm in becomes that eventually.
Yeah, of course.
Or at least the mocking, if not the failing. But yes, it's, I think, an intriguing little thing to think about. There have been, at this point, remakes of each of Night, Dawn, and Day. But as far as I'm aware, the remakes are not in any way related to each other.
No, they're not.
This remake of Dawn of the Dead is not in any way, shape, or form connected to the 1990s version of Night of the Living Dead. Life is silly sometimes.
It is.
Here's my point.
But I would say, is there any meaningful way in which 1978's Dawn of the Dead is connected to 1968's Night of the Living Dead in the first place?
No.
Yeah, they all kind of just like exist in this constellation of just George Romero's zombie satire, or not even satire, but just like the thing that he does. But yeah, so the way that I think of the original Romero Dead films is it's kind of like, you know how TV shows always kind of take place in this amorphous present where it's like, it's Thanksgiving when you're watching it during Thanksgiving, and it's Christmas when you're watching it in December. But then once the show goes off the air in May or whatever and comes back in September, it's like the next day, but it's still fall. Mm-hmm. That's how I think of the Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead kind of continuum. Because both films kind of take place toward the beginning of a zombie apocalypse. But I think that they take place in the same universe, but the time has just kind of shifted, and that's just kind of what's going on in my brain.
It's sort of like, well, it's always been 1978, even when it was 1969.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that kind of thing. Yeah. No, that tracks with my experience of those films as well. I think that's very much the way it is. And of course, Romero has, a kind of goal that he is pursuing of let's use zombies as commentary on the world we live in, which is not necessarily at play in the 1990 Night of the Living Dead, and is certainly not at play in the film we are here to talk about, which is the 2004 Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah. This movie gives the most minimal amount of lip service to the idea of the original, but only because they're copying a line from the original and not because they're copying an intent from the original.
I agree. And I will at least have lots and lots of nice things to say about Mr. Snyder in this film. I will tip my hand. This is not news to long-term readers or even long-term listeners. I think Dawn of the Dead is Zack Snyder's best film, in addition to it being his first film. So I will have many nice things to say about the directing, but I do want to start with possibly one of the less charitable things I will say, which is that there's a lot about this film's understanding of the 1978 film that reminds me a little bit of Zack Snyder's Watchmen, and that there's a certain vibe of you know the lines but you don't know what they mean going on here.
Yeah, well, I mean, would you say... Look, you've definitely... I've seen a great deal of Zack Snyder films because you just kind of can't help but do that, but you've certainly seen... Have you seen all of them?
I am at this point a Zack Snyder completist, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you have more context for me. But, I mean, he is a filmmaker who is largely about surfaces, is he not? You know, that's kind of his thing.
I would say that is almost the charitable way to describe that he's dumb.
Fair enough. But he's about the way that things look and how to make that as cool as possible, or at least as Snydery as possible.
He is a stylist. He is very much an American version of the French cinema du look, you could say, where like the goal is, have we made something stylish as all hell? Because his films are stylish as all hell. There's no denying that.
Yeah, there is absolutely no denying that. And I would say, from what I've seen, which again, like I've said, is a pretty wide swath, this is also my favorite outing of his, partially because it has his interest in style, but he hasn't quite developed the thing that he's doing yet. Like, we only get that kind of ramped down slow-mo in certain points. And not kind of like ladled super heavily throughout the entire movie.
He's not using speed ramping as a crutch the way that he would immediately start doing with this film's follow-up, but his second film, 300. And I would say when he uses it, it always feels like a choice that was motivated.
Yes, as opposed to this is the thing that I do. I personally, I mean, I don't know if I'm just poisoned in retrospect from being like, well, that's the Zack Snyder thing. He's doing slow-mo. Here we go again. Or if I'd seen this in 2004, if I would have also been annoyed by the slow-mo in this movie. There's no way for me to separate those two things.
That's legitimate. I like the slow-mo in this movie a little bit.
Okay.
So I'm going to give the movie the credit of assuming that you just have gotten sick of his thing. And it's a thing to get sick of, to be clear. Yeah.
And I want to come to this movie as charitably as possible also. I think that it has a lot of strengths. It's also the things that it's doing stylistically outside of the Zack Snyder things are very much 2004 style things, and I really don't like the aesthetic that we were working with in the early 2000s cinema, especially in the genre action-y horror-y space.
Yeah, no, it is a very... You could probably pinpoint this movie's release date to within 8 months just based on the cinematography. Yeah,
it's just got this like really slick and shiny quality. The whites are blasted into oblivion. It's got this digital sheen. I was looking it up, and I actually think large parts of it were shot on film, but I think it was like digitally fucked with in post or something.
I'm sure this was shot on film. Like, digital cinematography just wasn't a thing yet, really, when this came out. Like, it existed, but it existed in a very rarefied sort of way.
Yeah.
What was, however, a huge thing was digital intermediate and just in general digital post-production, tinkering with color. This was 4 years after Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which was really the film that kind of put that on the map. And yeah, there's a lot of digital color sweetening going on here, no question about it. There's a look. I feel comfortable using this word because it's a podcast. I'm not committing myself to it in print. I always think of this as a kind of chromatic look. I don't know if that word is even remotely accurate, but it's like all the colors seem to have been painted with like metallic poster paints or something.
Yeah, I do like that. It's something that my eyes just slide right off of. I mean, I like that term. Is to clarify what I was saying.
Yeah, I know what you meant.
Like there is a scene set outdoors during the sunrise where everything is just this uniform shade of kind of periwinkle blue. And it's ugly as fuck. I hate looking at that scene.
I admire your passion, even if I sound like I'm substantially more pro this film cinematography than you are, but I appreciate that it fires you up.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just it reminds me of like, the early Resident Evil films and just the things we were doing with.
Oh yeah, it totally reminds me of the early Resident Evil films. Like, and it sounds like I like the cinematography of those better than you as well.
Yeah, that's probably true. But here's the thing. So, this movie owes a lot to Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later.
Which was shot digitally for the record.
Yes, no, that's what I was gonna say. That one was shot digitally. It was like a very early shot on digital film, and that movie is sinfully ugly, to a point that there is a reason for that. It looks that way for they made a very specific choice. I don't like it. I love that movie, but I think the way that the cinematography it's not as much, the ugliness is not in service to the film as much as, say, the ugliness of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is in service to that film, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense.
Okay. Because like I get it to a point, but then there's a certain point where I'm just like, I don't like to look at this.
I would also be inclined to say, and this is a hot take, I don't know, Danny Boyle is very obviously a better film director than Zack Snyder. And even though I feel that the later career of Danny Boyle has somewhat obscured the fact that he was like making semi-important art films. So Boyle's a better film director. Certainly the Boyle of the early 2000s is better than Zack Snyder has ever been. But I would say that Zack Snyder, honestly, to me, feels like he's a little bit more... I don't want to use the word technician. He's not like a James Cameron type. But I think that Zack Snyder does have a stronger sense of my visuals will do X than Danny Boyle does. So I do think I'd actually go to bat for Dawn of the Dead as having maybe not more thoughtful cinematography than 28 Days Later, but certainly it's more interesting to look at to me.
Yeah, and that's where I was gonna go with the end of my statement there, is that I do like to look at this film more than I like to look at 28 Days Later, even though 28 Days Later is leaps and bounds ahead of this movie as far as like a horror film about running zombies goes. I don't know if you like Dawn of the Dead less than me or if you like 28 Days more than me. I would say 28 Days is better, but I don't know if I'd say it's by leaps and bounds better. Oh, interesting. Because, yeah, I mean...
I think 28 Days Later, and this is not the 28 Days Later podcast, but I think 28 Days Later just shoots itself in the face when it hits its third act.
That could very well be true. That part bothers me less, and the rest of the movie affects me more, probably, and we've kind of evened out to a higher...
That's fair.
Because, I mean, for me, 28 Days Later to me is an 8 out of 10, and this movie is a 7 out of 10. So it is kind of a minimal, like, numerical grade, but there are a lot more 8 out of 10s that live in my heart than 7 out of 10s.
That's fair. I probably have them both at 8 out of 10s, is I guess the difference for me.
Yeah. Okay, so we're mostly on the same page.
We're mostly on the same page.
But anyway, Dawn of the Dead 2004. We open on the brink of the apocalypse, which is something that I love in a zombie movie. I love watching everything fall apart.
Yeah, I will say there are not many specific ways that I think I like this movie better than the 78 original because I'm not a goddamned idiot.
Uh-huh.
But I will say I like that this film starts like 6 hours earlier than the 1978 film starts.
Yeah.
If you follow what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely, because that film basically opens on, we're in the TV station, there's already kind of like battalions of armed people trying to fight off zombies in the streets. It's kind of already started.
Yep.
But with this, we pick up with Anna, played by women-talking director Sarah Polley. And she's, a nurse working a long shift. She's heading home. And you get all these, zombie movie hints where it's like, that guy who got bitten is still in the ICU? His brain's on fire? What? And all these little hints and clues. She comes home. She lies on her bed while still wearing her scrubs, which, I mean, that's how you make patient zero right there. Disgusting. And she wakes up this little girl she saw earlier, now a zombie, bites her husband or boyfriend or whatever. Stuff goes to shit. She has to escape. Great time. And then you get to see the neighborhood just completely run to shit on fire as she tries to escape.
That, not so much the very, very, very opening, but the scene in the bedroom when she wakes up leading into her running out of the house, and the moment she runs out of the house, they switch to this exceptionally unattractive looking wide angle lens. I love that sequence. I think it's such a perfect way to start a zombie movie. I even love this sort of like grotesque look of that first shot when she's outside of the house, because it does feel so just warped. The world is broken. Look at how ugly and horrible the world suddenly has just become when she realizes sort of the context of what's going on.
Absolutely.
I think this movie has just a baller opening, and it leads right into just a fucking top tier opening credit sequence. Like, I know that sounds like a shade sort of thing, like it's got good credits. Zack Snyder does good credit sequences. Like, that's kind of the closest thing he has to like a real aesthetic like calling card, I think. And I think this movie maybe has his best opening credit sequence.
Yeah, and this is an opening credit sequence by Kyle Cooper, who's like the guy who makes opening credits.
Yep.
Apparently he used real human blood for the words on the screen, and I'm like, maybe we didn't have to do that, but cool.
You know, when you are an artist, you don't stop to ask should. You only go with can.
Yep. And if Zack Snyder's your boss, he says yes. But yeah, so it's a great opening credit sequence. And I agree with the use of that kind of ugly wide angle chaotic thing. That kind of there are choices aesthetically that Dawn of the Dead makes that I'm like, yes, I get it. And then other ones where it's like, that's just 2004, and that's where I fall off.
I get that. Also, is it terrible that I sort of let my mind drift when you referred to Sarah Polley, who is a great actor who has had a great directorial career, as the director of Women Talking, that part of me allowed myself to wonder if she learned everything she knew about color correction from Zack Snyder.
Maybe she did. Because that movie was like a super mixed bag for you, wasn't it?
It was pretty mixed, and the color grading was emphatically in the negative half of the bag.
Oh, yeah. No, I was, a month or so ago, I was in the theater with Ben watching, I don't know, some shit. But we saw the trailer for Women Talking, and I was just like, this movie is so powerfully ugly. It would take wild horses to drag me in to watch this movie.
It feels wrong. It feels like a mistake was made, and they confirmed that it was not a mistake. But it's just like professionals didn't check off, like they didn't sign off on that, right? That didn't happen, and yet. But this is also not the Women Talking podcast.
No, it's not. This is the Two Dudes Talking podcast. Hooray! Everybody wants one of those.
Hey.
Anyway, so so we pick back up. The credits start after she crashes her car and is briefly knocked unconscious. She wakes up not 28 days later, but maybe 28 minutes later. Basically, she very quickly hooks up with a guy named Kenneth, who is a cop played by Ving Rhames, one of the other extremely excellent actors who's just kind of popping around this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they also very quickly hook up with a trio of people. We've got Michael, who played by Jake Weber. He is a guy he sure is trying to have an American accent.
He sure is.
And he mostly is doing something that is in the neighborhood of one. We've also got Andre, played by Mekhi Phifer, and his wife or girlfriend or something. She's pregnant. She's Luda. She's Russian. She doesn't really talk. Luda is her name. I didn't specify that. She's not like,
that's a very good point.
She's not the rapper Ludacris.
That would have been a different movie made by a different director, but it's one I want to see.
Yeah, Ludacris as a pregnant Russian in a zombie movie, I would watch that.
That's what I'm saying.
Very much. Anyway, they all hole up in a mall. And again, this is the part where, the film shows that it is kind of more shallow than the original Dawn of the Dead. They hole up at the mall because the mall is the closest thing to them more than for any other reason. It's just like, well, we walked up this hill and here's a mall. Let's go.
Yep. Which I think speaks to a different set of priorities. Romero obviously is trying to like craft a universe, both in terms of like the universe the film takes place in, but also there's like a sense of like the characters themselves trying to reassert control in a way over the world. And I think for Snyder and Gunn, the point of the movie is much more, wouldn't it be cool to fight zombies in a mall? And and that would bother me more if the answer wasn't yes.
Ha! No, that's
basically
very, very fair. But here's the thing. So this movie does inherently have less personality than the 1978 film. We've talked about that, but I think the mall, especially as a piece of production design, suffers from that. And that's probably partially due to the way that we designed malls in the 2000s versus...
I was going to say, like, that's clearly on the movie a bit, but it's also... Shopping mall in 1978 occupies a different place in culture than shopping mall in 2004.
Yeah, it does. But it's just like, this mall is just this kind of impersonal stretch of glass and metal that it's got no personality, and it's just really boring to look at, and that's just a bummer to me.
No, I don't disagree at all. I mean, part of what I love about 78 film is it's about 1978. Like Romero somehow understood future generations are going to be like, what a weird thing malls were at this point in time, and I will capture all of its mallness and like amplify that sort of weirdness, that uncanny quality that happens inside these spaces. I don't think Dawn of the Dead is not a 2004 film to a similar extent, but it is that way accidentally. Like, as we've said, the cinematography is 2004 cinematography, but not because they wanted it to be, just because that's how it happened.
Yeah.
And I think there is absolutely not a modicum of thought to, like, what makes a mall in 2004 an interesting space. Like, that has just not entered anyone's brain.
No, which is a huge bummer, because you could have done something. But no, you really, as far as the mall goes, you only see a very limited stretch of the mall anyway. You get a little bit of this kind of upstairs gallery where the security guards are, and then there's this kind of quasi food court area with 2 or 3 stores around where they hole up for most of the film.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just not an interesting mall. But here's the thing is, I do think that's, you know, maybe not a choice, it's maybe an accident that it's like that. But they weren't making enough choices to distinguish it. And I think the same thing happens with the zombies. As far as, I mean, when you have fast zombies, which this movie is doing, as opposed to the original, which has the traditional, like, slow, shambling zombies. Those zombies, you don't get to spend as much time with them because, you know, they're just running around being all blah, 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 blah. But there's definitely...
I'm sorry, they were running around being how?
Blah, 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 blah.
Thank you.
Thank you. You don't get to spend as much time with them because of the nature of the thing that they're doing. But there are definitely kind of like zombie extras in the original film where you're like, oh, there's the Hare Krishna zombie. There's a zombie that's like this. You can see...
The Hare Krishna zombie is exactly what I was thinking of. Like, there is not even anything like that. Like, the zombies are not... Maybe they are recurring characters. They are not set up in a way that would cause you to recognize that fact.
Yeah, which, again, is not something that the film had to do, but if we're comparing it to the first one, which you shouldn't, but you have to when it's a remake.
You shouldn't, but you have to, exactly.
They just, there's no distinction to them. There's certainly a threat to them that is not present in the same way in the original. But they're not characters in any sort of way, which
no, they're just a force. And I think it's an important thing, and this actually, if I recall, came up a little bit when we talked about the remake of Night of the Living Dead back when we talked about it. On the one hand, it's not fair to make constant comparisons between a film and the movie it's remaking. On the other hand, Night and Dawn have such an enormous impact on the zombie genre. I would be comparing this film to the 1978 Dawn of the Dead regardless. It's like, might as well just lean into it. But I will say, if we compare it rather to any given zombie film that could have come out in 2004. I think it plays a lot better, but I do agree that does feel like something that is missing is the sense of the zombies as being former humans, the zombies as having like sort of identities and personalities that we can sort of track across the movie. They're really just more of, they're the Persians in 300, right? They're just a big wave of human-shaped killing objects.
Yeah, very much.
And that it becomes a hollower experience, and there's just no two ways around it. This is a hollower film than the 78 film. And certainly I think one of the key things that for Romero is always central to his zombie films, zombie apocalypses would not be very hard to survive if you didn't make stupid decisions. Like, people die in the movie because they fucked up, not because the zombies are just that dangerous. In this film, the 2004 Dawn of the Dead, people die because the zombies are an irresistible force. And that's a pretty substantial change, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that is something that you get when you're dealing with fast zombies like that. Like,
Agreed.
That there is an intention and power to them that there isn't to shamble zombies. And so basically, what I've said previously, that's kind of the end of my list of complaints. Those are the things that put me at a lower tier of liking this film than you do. Because I will say I love fast zombies as a subgenre.
Interesting. See, because I don't love fast zombies. This and 28 Days Later are kind of the only two fast zombies movies that I'm actually like, yes, I'm on board with what that movie is doing.
You've seen Wreck, right?
I have. I guess that occupies a different spot in my brain.
No,
for no good reason.
That's totally fair, because it's got a lot of different flavors going on in that movie. But Wreck is my favorite movie of all of the movies. And so my love of fast zombies kind of stems from just kind of like trying to get some of the shine from that apple from other places.
No, I respect that. I will be honest and say that if you'd given me a list of 5 movies and Wreck was on it, and you'd said pick the ones that are not zombie movies, I might have forgotten that it was a zombie movie, period. Because it is, but it's also not. It doesn't do the things that I expect zombie movies to do.
Yes, that's correct, and it's also got this very Spanish Catholic flavor to it. That in the sequels ends up like much more on a kind of possession-y angle than a zombie angle.
I think that's the thing. It has sort of a Demons 2 vibe to me, which is also a zombie movie that's sort of wearing a disguise of not being a zombie movie. And I guess that's kind of where I think of Wreck as being, even though it is much closer to being an actual zombie movie.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair, and no shade on you. I was just saying, like, that's where my kind of love of that trickles down from, because
I get that.
The core zombie concept is something that as a hypochondriac germaphobe over here, like the idea of this kind of irresistible viral scourge on the planet is one of my kind of like central fears, which it's been a great couple of years for me.
I was gonna say, I'm surprised you're still with us. Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. It's been a hard time, but anyway, like when I have stress dreams, they are about being in a zombie apocalypse, because it just seems exhausting, and also scary. But anyway, so when you have that kind of core thing, plus the zombies are much more willing to battle it out with you, that does get to me.
That's fair.
But anyway, so I think this movie, there's not that much more plot we need to get through. There are other characters. There's the kind of wicked security guard CJ, played by House of Cards' Michael Kelly, with this wild kind of white trash Fu Manchu mustache going on.
Mm-hmm.
Ty Burrell shows up as the James Gunn mouthpiece, sardonic asshole.
Mm-hmm.
And you get some other characters. There's like 2 younger people who are sort of implied to be falling in love, but we don't spend that much time with them, which is fine.
Yeah, no, it's very much like Sarah Polley and Ving Rhames are the protagonists of this film, and everyone else sort of is the ensemble spinning around them. We do get a little appearance from Matt Frewer, who I always I am enough of a child of the 80s that anytime Matt Frewer shows up in a movie, I'm always like, oh, it's Max Headroom, and I get happy. So.
Oh, Max Headroom is he a cartoon? He's a cartoon, right?
He is a cartoon, sort of.
But is it like stereoscopic or something?
He's an early CGI effect.
Yeah, okay.
And he is I would need to look into exactly the technology going on, but he is played by Matt Frewer.
Okay, cool.
And sort of modeled in the likeness of Matt Frewer.
Yeah, okay, great. For the record, I know the word I said is nothing. I'm tired, it's fine. But no, I did not know Matt Frewer. Wait, so he's the father of the young girl who's like, I got bit, right? Okay, great.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
He gets very much the arc that you give to a guy that a certain subset of genre faithful are going to be like, ooh, he's an icon. So you need to give him like a big scene, and he gets the big scene of like, I've been bit, but I'm going to manfully hide it until I can't hide it anymore. And I think that's basically what he does in this movie. Very small role because he probably cost more than a lot of these people, but not like a ton more. But
yeah, probably not. I don't know. Well, a lot of these people Zack Snyder was catching either on the upswing or the downswing.
Right.
Like, God, who would have been the biggest get, do you think? Ving Rhames, probably.
It had
right?
to
Yeah,
be
it had
Ving
to
Rhames.
be.
It had to be Ving Rhames.
Because Mekhi Phifer, I think, was like big a couple of years before this. Like, he was in, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. Was he in O? Was that him?
I think so.
Yeah,
I'm pulling up Mekhi Phifer's. Yes, he was in O. He was in 8 Mile. Honestly, this was probably the crest of Mekhi Phifer's ability to get paychecks. Was this specific movie?
Yeah, and I think that
because it's all downhill after this.
Oh, for sure. He's now on the series Love, Victor, which is the spin-off of Love, Simon, which it's a much better show than Love, Simon is a movie. And he plays just like the dad, but he's good in that, so he's almost back. He sort of is.
Okay. And like I don't know that Pauly would have ever commanded a giant paycheck. This is far enough in the far enough past Go that she's probably lost the sort of aura that Go would have put around her for a few years. So she was probably a smaller get than Ving Rhames.
Yeah. And she kind of vanished off the face of the earth for like a decade shortly after this.
Well, she decided she enjoyed directing more than acting.
Yeah, which fair.
'Cause, I mean, she made her directorial debut like 2 years after this.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's an interesting cast because normally with a kind of when you're looking back on a movie like this, you're looking at the cast and you're like, holy shit, that future star is here and that future star, and this is kind of like it's a really mixed bag of recognizable people, but more character actor focused than like huge stars, which is really interesting. But anyway, I don't remember what the fuck I was talking about. But basically, it's got a solid ensemble. I think Ving Rhames is great in this, and I think Sarah Polley is quite terrific as well. I think they're the best people to hang this movie on.
Agreed, 100%.
But yeah, so you got the fast zombies. They're in a mall. They're in a mall that is it's so glass heavy that I'm like I feel like I wouldn't try to make this my stronghold, but you do you, everyone. But oh yeah, we were talking about the new people that come in. It was interesting to me the way that they doled out information. So you get a montage of news clips where you're getting a lot of cameos from the original cast of Dawn of the Dead. You get a Ken Foree cameo, you get Tom Savini, you get one of the white guys. I don't remember which one.
But one of them, yeah. I mean, I don't even remember which one of the white guys when I'm watching the original film. So.
Oh yeah, exactly. They don't matter. But so Tom Savini himself gets to deliver the information that you have to shoot the zombies in the head. But they do withhold the information that bites transfer the zombie disease to quite a bit later and have Sarah Polley kind of figure it out using her skills as a nurse. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize we hadn't already figured this out yet.
I feel like that's just a danger not only of remaking an iconic film, of making a film in a genre where by 2004, the idea that you get zombified by getting bitten. Like, imagine making a zombie movie where that's not true in 2004.
Yeah, right? That's just not a thing.
Right. So, like, I mean, I feel like if there was actually a zombie outbreak in our world, we would assume until proven otherwise that you get zombies you become a zombie from a zombie bite, just because that's what every movie is.
Yeah. No, yeah.
So I think that's just the film being insufficiently willing to let the audience's genre knowledge guide the story, or maybe good about not letting it happen. I don't know, but it does feel like that's a weirdly protracted sequence.
No, it is, but see, here's the thing, because they split it up in that weird way, because they really just hand you the information about shooting them in the head. Like, I understand, in this world, zombies don't exist, and now they have to figure out how to deal with them. But they could have just put both of those nuggets into the newscast and just had done with it.
Right.
But, I guess they wanted to give Anna something to do, because she's smart and has skills and has to use them. It's a screenplay.
It is. And I mean, like, any time that we let Sarah Polley have a little scene where she's doing science, like, it's good.
Yeah.
She's a very capable actress. We give her scenes.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, so basically that's kind of what it is. Oh, and in addition to the cameos, Galen Ross, who plays the main female lead of the movie, she's not in it. She stopped acting after Creepshow in 1982. But they do have a scene where there's a montage of everyone kind of hunkering down in the mall and having a fun time. There's a woman who's trying on dresses in front of a mirror, and it's at a fashion boutique called Galen Ross.
Oh, I never caught that.
Yeah, it's kind of sweet.
Oh, that is sweet.
Again, if they did a reference to the other white guy, I wouldn't know it.
I mean, I don't even know I don't know either of the white guys' names, so.
I was looking it up during the movie because I was like, that white guy's got to be someone. One of them is named David MG, and I think he's the one who's not in this.
Okay.
And the other one, he's not. And the other guy who was in it as a cameo, his name is Scott Reiniger.
Okay.
So,
yeah, that's a name I recognize.
Yeah, Scott.
Yeah.
Congrats. Anyway, so other than like the kind of basics that we covered, what's the thing that you think makes you like this movie so much? Like, what's giving it that 8 out of 10?
I mean, part of it is that I think the exact same style that you're bristling at, I find to be a good fit for the story being told. I find the kind of overclocked music video-ness of it charming in a way. Like, I think I have enough distance from this period of filmmaking that I'm able to be like, I remember the 2004. That was a time. Because there is that like very post Michael Bay sort of commercial aesthetic going on here that can be enormously annoying, but it also is like, I don't know, it was cool. It was a time. I like it better than what we have now. I do like, we haven't really talked very much about Gunn other than just being the screenwriter of this film is named James Gunn. I think this is many of Gunn's strengths as a screenwriter and none of what I perceive at least as being his weaknesses. It is not snarky in the way that I find a lot of his scripts to be, usually to their detriment, but it does have very good character work. I feel like, even though we've sort of made the point that only Anna and Kenneth have like real, clearly defined, these are our leads, they have personalities. Excuse me. I do think one of the things that we haven't really pinned down, but is very true and very obvious, I think, this film has like such a much larger cast of humans than the 78 film does.
For sure.
78 film has 4 people, 2 of whom you and I can't even really remember.
Yep.
But I mean, it does have those 4. We do know who they are. This has like an entire little tiny community inside the mall, which is a really big change, and I think it's one that actually does work a lot to give this film its own sort of like identity as an object. It's not just a retread, it's much more about sort of like it's more, how do I phrase it? It does feel like you get this sense of like a small little town inside the mall, basically. There's like probably, what, 10 or a dozen people going on, all of whom are defined enough that I get a sense of who they are. And I feel bad for them when they die. I'm rooting for them to not die. And I would say a disproportionate number of them, in fact, do not die. This is one of the problems I do have with the film. It leaves way too many. I mean, arguably it leaves absolutely none of its cast alive at the very, very end. Uh-huh. But it leaves too many people to get to the end credits.
Yeah, and that might be a result of its kind of more sprawling nature. But yeah, it's less willing to sacrifice those people than a movie called Dawn of the Dead, frankly, probably should be.
Yeah.
But you're right. The ones that we lose, for the most part, it's affecting. I mean, I think the most effective sequence is the character who doesn't have any dialogue. His name is Andy. He is on the roof of the gun shop, kind of across the vast ocean of the parking lot of the mall, and they can communicate to each other with binoculars and like big whiteboards that they write messages on. It's very much like the Taylor Swift "You Belong With Me" music video, a reference that everyone in this podcast and listening understands.
I certainly understand that reference. Mm-hmm. Taylor Swift is a pop star.
She is indeed, and she's also the star of Cats.
She's one of the many stars. There are more stars in Cats than there are in the heavens.
The night sky is dark because all the stars are in Cats 2019.
This is the first Christmas season I didn't watch Cats since Cats came out, by the way, and I'm feeling kind of bad about it.
Yeah, it's same here, and it feels wrong. It's like there's this piece of the universe missing.
It's like I feel worse about missing Cats than about missing Grinch this year.
That is powerful, and I respect that.
That's what I'm saying. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying I did make a McCavity reference about 2 days ago, so I feel like I'm still living the Cats lifestyle.
Good. But no, I do think Andy the gun store owner is one of the unambiguous strengths of this movie. That's such a wonderful little arc, and weirdly underplayed. Like I do think there's a sense in which that's kind of being, like, the visuals are carrying that. Like, we never get close to Andy. We always see him from POV shots. So there's the sense of he is a very distant, tiny little figure. We kind of have to strain to see him. We have to kind of strain to read the words he's written down. And I think that all works for me. Like, the Andy material, I think, is one of this film's, like, clear highlights. I like it a lot.
Yeah, that material is a highlight. And in the sequence where somebody whose perspective we are sharing ends up at the gun store, we don't go with her. Mm-hmm. That's a sequence where they're finally deciding to prepare their escape. They will not be ready in time for Andy to have not starved to death. So they're trying to deliver him food in the kind of saddlebags on a dog in this kind of adorable sequence that turns not adorable. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so once the dog gets in, the zombies find the entryway to Andy's gun store and invade. But the girl, Nicole, played by Lindy Booth, she loves the dog. She goes to rescue the dog. So you're hearing her talking about what's going on over the walkie-talkie, and also you hear from Andy when he gets the walkie-talkie from the dog as well. He doesn't know that bites transfer the disease, so he reveals that he's been bitten, and everybody knows what that means, but they don't know whether to tell him or not. Mm-hmm. And it's this very Pontypool-esque sequence where you're hearing this incredibly tragic and incredibly violent thing that's happening, but you're not seeing any of it, and it's very withholding, and I think that's very effective.
Completely agreed. I like the Pontypool comparison. I wouldn't have thought to make that, but I think that's very, very on point.
Thank you. I'm gonna rewatch Pontypool again soon. That movie really, really got me.
Good. But yeah, so I'd say I like the amount of characterization and sort of the sense of I feel sorrier when people die in this movie than I usually do in zombie movies, and that counts for a lot for me. I do like the aesthetic. I do like, Zack Snyder's thing is so weird to me because he's obviously, like, dumb. I already used that word to describe him, but he just is. He's He's a big, doofy, weird bro guy. But, like, I feel like he is... Like, whereas a Michael Bay film is just as dumb in a way that radiates contempt. Like, I always feel like a Michael Bay film hates me. Zack Snyder feels like he really wants to put on a show for me. And even though he's not always very good at it, in fact, he's often quite bad at it, I get this sense of, like, enthusiasm. He loves the movies he's making. He's got, like, so much sort of passion and, like, isn't it cool that I get to do X? And I sort of get swept up in that a lot of the time. And I do think some of his really stupid decisions are cool in a, like, 18-year-old film school guy way. And that's a good energy for me. I like that energy.
Yeah, that's totally fair. There's an enthusiasm to it. It might be hollow as a product, but it's not hollow for him.
Right, exactly. It's like he is super enthusiastic about really trivial shit, but his enthusiasm makes me happy that the trivial shit is happening, even as I recognize you're just devouring McDonald's French fries. Like, there's no nutrition here, but you're so happy, and I like that you're happy.
Yeah, and I think without that energy, I mean, I don't know, like, I think the exact kind of contact point between the thing that Zack Snyder does and the thing that James Gunn does is probably the montage that's scored by Richard Cheese's lounge cover of Down with the Sickness.
Down with the Sickness. That is it's such a great stupid scene.
Oh yeah, it's so just indulgent in such a delicious way.
Absolutely. It's like, I can't defend that sequence. I don't want it to go away, though. I like it.
Oh, yeah.
Even though it's terrible. Because it is terrible. It's a terrible sequence, but it's a great terrible sequence. I don't know.
Yeah, no, but it's got gusto. It's got that thing.
Exactly. And I do agree that is a really perfect point where their two future aesthetics come into play. And of course, at this point, we don't really know a lot about Zack Snyder's future aesthetic. James Gunn had by this point done a little bit. I think he'd written both Scooby-Doos by this point.
Probably. And he'd worked with Troma. He did Tromeo and Juliet and some other stuff.
Obviously, like, the rise of James Gunn, auteur, hasn't happened by this point. Certainly, James Gunn, Kevin Feige of the DC universe, has not happened yet by this point.
Sweet Jesus, no, it has not.
But, like,
James Gunn, man who needs to delete his Twitter account.
Oh man, oh man, oh man. I find it fascinating, given who the people are, given their worldviews, given everything, how much less I like James Gunn as a person than Zack Snyder. And I shouldn't, but I do.
Yeah, it is that yeah, you're so right, because I feel like Zack Snyder has this army of horrible people who love him, but I don't get the sense that he's happy about that.
Right.
And James Gunn seems like probably, I don't know, his instincts align more with mine, even though they're still, like, pretty juvenile and, like, middle schooly. But just the ways that he interacts with the world are just so repulsive in so many ways.
It's a thing.
Yeah. Anyway, you know that it's related because James Gunn wrote this movie. So
he did write this movie, and I don't know if I actually said this or if I just implied it. I do think this is James Gunn's best screenplay.
Interesting. Okay.
I think you could probably stack the first Guardians against it.
That's the only one I would go for. Actually, I really like Slither. I would throw that in there too, but I could see it being in contention at least.
Slither, I need to revisit Slither. I liked it. It feels much like this, actually, now that I think about it. He's just sort of like adding filigree to a very sturdy genre like thing. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like Slither does not reinvent anything, it just adds snarky humor to it. This doesn't reinvent anything, it just gives me slightly more robust characters.
Yeah, and your capacity for snarky humor is much lower than the average bear, I would say.
That is correct. I overdosed on snark and have now renounced its sinful ways.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. But no, this is definitely It's high up there for him. It's the same thing. It's got that kind of raw James Gunn thing without him leaning as hard into the other things that he does, the aesthetic that he developed later on.
It's not jokey like really at all, which I feel is at least in part because I don't think Zack Snyder has a sense of humor.
No, that doesn't seem to be the case.
And so maybe it was a jokey script that Zack Snyder just kind of like smoothed out into this kind of like, again, sincerely bro-y sort of thing. But like, yeah, I don't know if there's a single funny on purpose joke in a Zack Snyder film that actually lands.
Yeah, because certainly there are two James Gunn characters in here. You got Ty Burrell as Steve. He's the one who always has like he's just very negative and pessimistic, and he's just making fun of everyone. And then CJ, the Michael Kelly character, the security guard, he has lines that are not, the character isn't making jokes, but they're like overwritten James Gunn lines, like drink a nice tall glass of shut the fuck up, or whatever he says.
Right.
But outside of those two characters, it's nothing, none of that. And CJ has a relatively minor presence in the film because he gets kind of sequestered in a jail cell very early on.
Exactly, yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right. Like, the Ty Burrell character is very clearly the James Gunn element in this film.
Yeah, but it's not a film-ruining element. It's just like...
Oh, no. I like him in this. I think he is a necessary counterweight to the Sarah Pauli Ving Rhames, like, emotional core.
Yeah, and also, yeah, he services that as a function of the screenplay, but also he's someone whose nasty sense of humor is a defense mechanism for just the uncontrollable horrors around him, and it makes sense.
It does. Also, not to spoil what happens in the 19-year-old film at this point, the final disposition of his character is satisfying.
Yeah.
It's the thing I was rooting to have happen, and it did, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, oh my god, we've been talking for a while. Is there anything else you feel like there is to say about 2000?
I think we covered most of it. So I think we're both coming down on not as good as the 78 film.
I mean, most movies aren't.
It is entirely defensible. I might even go ahead and make this claim. No zombie film ever is better than the 78 film. I'm curious if you think it's better than the remake of Night.
Ooh. I think that's actually not a tough decision for me. I think it is, very much because it's actually doing something that's different from the original. Because that Night remake is really just putting a splash of color on a very good original movie, and doesn't have that much to offer. This movie has a very different story that it's telling in a very different way, and I think that's more valuable.
Like, weirdly, even though it is clearly of the four films the one with the least on its mind, it doesn't feel that way because it is being its own thing, using the bones of the 78 film as opposed to just trying to like... I like this movie more in its complete hollowness than I would have if, particularly these two people, if Gunn and Snyder had decided we are going to make an anti-consumerism satire, it would have gone very horribly. But even setting that aside, I like that it didn't feel like it had to. Like, we already have that. If I want to watch an anti-consumerism Night of the Living Dead or Dawn of the Dead, I can.
Yeah, and they're so confident in the thing that they're doing and the way that it just relates to... It hangs on the bones of Dawn of the Dead. And they were pretty much right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is definitely... I'm glad I saw it. This was a first-time watch for me. That's kind of why I wanted to put it on the list to begin with, because I was just like, I have no excuse that I haven't seen this movie yet.
No, this is... I think certainly of the wave of zombie movies in the 2000s, it's clearly not as important as 28 Days Later, but it's right up head and shoulders with any other zombie film from that decade.
Yeah.
Probably not as important as Shaun of the Dead. Of the two zombie films from 2004, it's probably not quite as important as Shaun of the Dead.
It is wild that those two films came out in the same year.
It's pretty great.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, we did. I mean, because, 28 Days Later kind of ushered in that resurgence of both styles of zombie. Yeah, no, those are great. There's a lot of... I think it was a reasonably solid decade, but yeah, this one stands in the top. Like, I would say 28 Weeks Later is also pretty terrific, on my end, at least.
No, it is. It's not as good as the first one, but there are individual elements of 28 Weeks Later that I think are better than 28 Days Later, and I live in hope. I know that there exists at least a pitch for 28 Months Later, and I hope that the time comes when we get to see it.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? A little treat for us. Anyway, that's gonna do it for us on this one. Thank you so much for listening. As always, you can find more of our stuff at alternateending.com. You got Tim's reviews, you got my reviews, you got podcasts, you got stuff from other people that aren't on this podcast. But in 2 weeks, we're going to reconvene and discuss. I mean, I guess sequel's not the right word, but another continuation. We're going to be watching the 2001 film Elvira's Haunted Hills in honor of us watching the original Elvira, Mistress of the Dark a couple months ago, and I'm very excited to watch that. That'll be a first time for me.
It will not be my first time, but I do look forward to revisiting it. It's a very different film than the original.
Yeah, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, because that is a very mixed bag of a film, but one led by a delightful person, and she's still here, so great. Anyway, yeah, catch you on the flippity flop. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.